When, despite light, we remain blind and that truth becomes a mirage, the shadow of Yabel, the Archon of Lies, looms on the walls of our reality. Yabel is not simply a figure of darkness, but the very incarnation of the confusion between appearance and truth. It is that confusion which insinuates itself into every thought, every belief, every certainty that we maintain. In this universe where the human soul seeks to awaken through Gnosis, Yabel convinces the human being that this world is the only reality. Why does the human being, though bearer of light, love to believe these lies? How does Yabel persuade us to prefer the rationality of the false rather than to confront naked truth? Yabel, the Archon of Lies, is not simply an absence of knowledge. It is an archontic entity born of ignorance itself. He is an emanation of Yabel The Archon and shares with him a nature disconnected from the divine light. He is animated by a will to maintain human souls in illusion and suffering. Subordinate to Yabel The Archon in the cosmic hierarchy, Yabel is a fundamental archon in the psychic structure of domination that imprisons human souls in ignorance. Yabel is a deficient power, certainly endowed with a power, but the latter has neither divine foundation nor true wisdom. He is a being deprived of the divine light. However, far from being aware of his weakness, Yabel is convinced of his legitimacy. He firmly believes that this power is authentic, although it rests solely on illusion. Yet the human soul, under the influence of Yabel, bogs down in its false certainties. Yabel has no knowledge of the pleroma, and this ignorance is an ontological incapacity to perceive divine truth. This void of knowledge makes of him an entity that feeds on distorted perceptions of reality without ever touching ultimate truth. Yabel is at once creator and prisoner of his own distorted universe. He imposes a false reality while being himself incapable of perceiving what lies beyond this illusion, thus reinforcing his hold on the human soul. Yabel believes himself the ultimate authority, but this authority is only a symbolic usurpation. He manipulates signs, symbols, and human beliefs, transforming them into instruments of domination. He creates a system in which he becomes the sole master, imposing facades to hide the absence of true power. His authority is a distorted mirror of divine sovereignty, which he uses to establish his domination over human minds, keeping them in the illusion of his legitimacy. Finally, Yabel is the incarnation of false sovereignty. In the pleroma, sovereignty belongs to the divine light, the wisdom that reunites and that unifies everything. Yabel, on the contrary, governs by fragmentation and distortion. His power rests on an illusion of sovereignty that feeds only on separation and domination. He embodies a form of power that crushes the human soul which has neither freedom nor access to truth, for Yabel ensures that the illusion of his power is the only reality that can be perceived. Yabel is a major archon, a prominent entity emanating from ignorance. Although he exercises an important power in the Kenoma, he remains subordinate to Yaldabaoth, the supreme demiurge. Yabel shares the same distorted nature as the other archons, but his position is that of a servant in the larger order imposed by Yaldabaoth. As such, he plays a key role in the perpetuation of illusion, controlling and manipulating human souls through psychic illusion and not material. Yabel reigns over the Kenoma, where human souls are caught in cycles of suffering and reincarnation. They are locked into beliefs and illusions imposed by the Archon. In this intermediate heaven, Yabel shapes the psychic and spiritual order of human beings by manipulating their perceptions of reality. He does not impose physical laws that govern the material world, but mental illusions that modify the manner in which the soul perceives the world. Yabel imposes a system of beliefs which, though seeming natural, reinforces the separation between the soul and divine truth. This system imprisons the soul in illusion, distancing it from the true Gnosis. Yabel thus becomes the supreme authority in a world where truth is hidden behind a veil of illusion, directing human souls through confusion, false certainty, and ignorance. He manipulates human thoughts and beliefs, creating a system where truth is concealed and where souls remain prisoners of their illusions, far from true Gnosis. Yabel is frequently perceived as a cosmic lord, but his reign is a false sovereignty. He does not possess a just sovereignty, but exercises a domination that locks souls into systems of distorted beliefs. Like Yaldabaoth, he seeks to impose an illusory order where the freedom of the soul is maintained in ignorance. His cosmic lordship rests on an authority that is only a distorted imitation of true divine sovereignty. In this illusion, Yabel subjects human souls to a power he believes legitimate, but which is in reality only a trap within the materiality of the Kenoma. The relation of Yabel to reality manifests itself before all by the imposition of a blind obedience to authority. In the Kenoma, Yabel shapes a distorted psychic order where individuals follow without questioning imposed mental laws. For example, he makes them believe that the value of a person resides in their wealth or their social status, thus creating an illusion that makes of them slaves to their material desires. These laws are not divine nor natural principles, but mental illusions that shape the perceptions of humans, imposing upon them an order of submission. Obedience to these laws does not proceed from personal reflection, but from an interior submission to an authority that seems legitimate and natural. This psychic submission is amplified by the fear of punishment, a constant dread that haunts the human soul. Yabel and Harmas, though acting on different planes, work in concert to maintain this fear. Yabel by manipulating the social and psychic representations of individuals, and Harmas by imposing material laws and systems of physical control, cultivate this dread. The fear of punishment is omnipresent, and any attempt at escape from this mental and physical system encounters a forced return into submission, maintained by this double psychic and material pressure. Beyond fear, Yabel succeeds in internalizing submission, transforming the illusion he imposes into an absolute truth in the consciousness of human beings. This mental law does not remain a simple external principle, but becomes a deeply rooted psychological law. Individuals no longer have need of an external surveillance. They integrate the legitimacy of this law into their mind, perceiving it as a part of themselves. Submission becomes an interior reflex, an absolute acceptance of the established order, to such a point that any questioning of this authority becomes unthinkable. Yabel inscribes this law within the human psyche, rendering it irrefutable and omnipresent. This mental submission is all the more pernicious because Yabel blurs the boundaries between order and justice. The order he imposes, made of suffering, separation, and disillusionment, is perceived as a form of justice, for Yabel makes believe that he holds the only possible truth. The order he regulates in the Kenoma seems to answer to a universal logic, an implacable law that governs psychic reality. But in reality, this order is a false structure, an illusion maintained by the confusion between what is just and what is imposed by the distorted authority of Yabel and Harmas. Individuals, incapable of discerning the difference, accept this order as legitimate and natural, and consider it as a sacred law to which they must submit. Finally, this false authority takes on an even more profound dimension through the sacralization of hierarchical power. Yabel and Harmas sacralize the authority they impose, making it pass for divine and incontestable. They transform the order they impose into a sacred principle, untouchable and unalterable, to which the individual must submit as to a divine law. Yabel participates actively in the symbolic shaping of the human. In the Kenoma, the space of illusion, he creates the symbols that govern the manner in which the individual perceives the world and his role within it. These symbols are not simply signs, but living forms that mold the human mind, orienting his thought, his beliefs, and his perceptions. For example, Yabel can transform profound spiritual concepts like the belief in a superior entity into superstition, into imbecilic faith in a false god. That which was formerly an interior quest for meaning and truth becomes a routine, a reflex preventing the awakening of the human soul, transforming belief into forgetfulness and action into apathy. The individual contents himself with a superficial satisfaction, disconnected from Gnosis and from the true spiritual quest. Yabel thus transforms essential values into commodities, entering the human soul in distorted representations of the world. He thus acts principally on the psyche and not on raw flesh. Yabel, far from concentrating on the physical body, operates directly in the human soul and mind. He influences thoughts, desires, and beliefs, rendering the individual a slave to his own mental representations. For example, through media and popular culture, Yabel ensures the idea that the value of a person is linked to his appearance, thus shaping a worldly identity which rests on external and materialistic criteria. Individuals, influenced by these thought structures, judge themselves and compare themselves constantly to inaccessible ideals, creating a cycle of dissatisfaction and disillusionment. The soul is shaped in his image, not by matter, but by the distorted thought that he imposes. This work on the psyche prevents the individual from perceiving reality in its pure form, locking him in a labyrinth of erroneous thoughts and false principles, like social perfectionism or the incessant quest for external recognition. By this manipulation, the Archon of Lies contributes to giving to man a language, a self-image, a worldly identity. Thus, Yabel influences the construction of self-image through collectively accepted values, like competition, merit, and individual success, which become the criteria of judgment by which the individual evaluates his own existence. This language, whether media, political, social, or digital, imposes a distorted vision of human reality, reducing identity to a sum of social roles and external behaviors. Social networks, in particular, play a central role in this process by encouraging the constant validation of self-image through likes, shares, and comments, thus reinforcing a conception of identity shaped by public approval. The individual, under the influence of Yabel, becomes a puppet of collective representations. His self-image is not the reflection of his interior truth, but it is molded by social and cultural norms, amplified and distorted by digital platforms, which only reinforce his estrangement from Gnosis. Finally, Yabel participates in the ensuring of the soul in representations of reality, whether social, cultural, or personal. These latter are not perceived as human creations, but as natural and immutable truth. In this regard, the professional career imposes the idea that the meaning of life resides in advancement, this mental structure where success is perceived as a linear and universal path. This idea, which dominates a large part of contemporary society, becomes an invisible prison for the mind, preventing it from reconnecting with more profound values like spiritual seeking or self-understanding. These representations blind our mind and conceal from it the path towards the light of the pleroma. The soul is thus trapped not by matter, but by mental constructions imposed by Yabel, which cut it off from the divine light. Let us now return to the question which animated our reflection. Why does the human being, though bearer of light, prefer to believe sophisticated lies rather than contemplate the truth? Man, profoundly enshrouded in the materiality of the kenoma, tends to cling to the illusion of his certainties, rather than to confront naked truth. The Archon of Lies, Yabel, exploits this weakness of the human soul, the need for reassuring reality, a reality that avoids the discomfort of the unknown and of divine truth. Yabel therefore imposes sophisticated lies, thus shaping a world where the soul, far from awakening to Gnosis, loses itself in the labyrinth of illusions and distorted beliefs. Thus, the human being, through fear, through comfort, or through ignorance, prefers this rationality of the false, allowing him to confront the unknown, rather than to access Gnosis and to discover the path toward the divine light. The question of the lies is at the heart of the archontic control system, and other entities in the shadow of our confusion weave mechanisms of control just as cunning. Adonin, the Archon of Forgetfulness, exploits the reflex of voluntary servitude and the fear of punishment to internalize the submission of the human being.